Hi everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week our guest is Jordan Miller. Jordan actually is the founder of a distributed AI called Satori, and he started it after leaving the religion of his youth, and he's now fascinated with various metaphysics and philosophies and their relationship to death. So I'm excited to interview Jordan, and welcome to the show.
That's right. Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's always fun to meet people and just kind of on the fly interview them. But before we get into all that, I would love to ask my guests, how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
So I'm 37, grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I don't know what, it's kind of weird. There's the millennials that I feel like are right behind me, but technically I'm in that group. I don't know.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like in the middle is something.
I find most people between 35, I'm 43, most people between 35 and 45 give a very similar answer. We're just kind of like, I don't know. And I think same with politics and almost any other subject right now. It's maybe we're like the confused generation or something. And so I didn't say you were in the Church of Latter-day Saints, but I'm assuming with Salt Lake City and all that, that's the religion of your youth?
That's the one.
So I kind of am going to organize this interview into three parts. I think we'll talk about that religion. I'll have you explain it and explain your relationship to it. Then we'll talk about why you left and what your opinion is on what happens when you die, which is the chief purpose of this program. And then I'd love to hear about Satori and the AI project you're doing. So does that sound good to you?
That sounds good. You know, the AI project, I've been going on podcasts talking about that, and that's how I found your podcast. But I actually wouldn't mind if we didn't get to it.
Okay.
Because I think these topics are, this is a special podcast.
Awesome. I really respect and appreciate that because, I would much rather, it's not that I don't want to talk about it, but it's just kind of something that isn't as interesting to me because I started this podcast from working in hospice, and I just found that a lot of Americans in particular don't even want to hear about death, talk about death, and then when it comes up, it's like weird, awkward, and bitter for people on both sides of it sometimes. So, and I was not raised religious. I'm technically Jewish, and I could say I was raised Jewish, but I really wasn't. So I'm just fascinated by anyone who grew up as a child in a religion, and especially one who like leaves it, just because in America there's like a lot of narratives like that, and it's just like interesting. So I'm not going to share my opinions on your religion or any other one, but before we even talk about what people call Mormonism or the Church of Latter-day Saints, how would you explain it to people? And I would just keep in mind that people my age probably saw the South Park episode about it, and people older or younger probably have a different impression. So I would just like your impression, whatever you want to give us.
Okay. Well, to put it in the context, I mean, you've got it's a Western religion. So you've got the Catholicism, and then you've got the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And then you've got the New Age, or I should say New World religions. So back in the 1800s, 1700s, there was this huge religious revival. We're going to make our own religions over here. And Mormonism came out of that. There's the Quakers, and there's a bunch of other kind of religions that started at that time. And Mormonism was part of that batch. Yeah. So I think that's important as far as a historical context. They're a little different as far as their doctrine and everything. They say, what's the most important thing? Let's see. They say, well, you've got the Bible, then that's, the Word of God. But we've also found this other book that, was written supposedly here in the Americas during the same time. And that's the Book of Mormon. So that's the whole premise, is that Joseph Smith found a book and translated it, and like it's a second Bible. So that's the whole idea. And then, the religion came out here to Utah.
Yeah, let's real quick, just because I want to make sure, I would like to compare what I have learned, not from South Park, from actual scholarship, to what you were A, told, and B, believed. So the version I know, it's very foggy, but something happened, and it seems like people in Illinois did not enjoy the Mormons there, and they literally burned their town or something to the ground, and so they left, and I guess Brigham Young at that point was leading them, and he found this holy sacred land in the desert, which is known as Salt Lake City now. Is that somewhat correct?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, the Mormons will paint it totally as persecution, and that's fine. It certainly was. But at the same time, would you want a cult living in your town? So it's probably not good to kill people or throw them out, but
Well, if my town
I
is
can kind of
America
see.
and the Christian right is a cult, then I would have some familiarity. No,
Right.
I'm just kidding.
There you go.
Yeah, but no, it is funny. I actually, when I used to teach ESL, in almost every Latin language, the word cult means sect, and sect means cult, and so they would call, like, it was just very awkward, and I would have to explain to them the word cult over and over again. Now, when was the first time as a child that you heard someone refer to your family religion as a cult, if ever?
Well, so most religions start as a cult.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cult following this little thing, and some cults are not as sexually deranged or as violent as others,
Mm-hmm.
but most of religions, I think, throughout history, it just seems like the life cycle of a religion. It
Mm.
starts out as a cult. As it grows, it either sheds that kind of weird stuff like polygamy, or it sheds whatever makes it weird, so that it can continue to grow into what you would call a religion,
Mm-hmm.
or it doesn't, and it just kind of fizzles out and dies. So I would say the Mormon religion nowadays, I guess I could call it a cult, but really it just means it's a young religion at this point, right? It's only 200 years old,
Yeah.
whereas the Catholic is like 2,000 years old, or maybe 1,500 or whatever it is. So.
And so, like, when you say that it sheds, like, some of the things, I think that's kind of like the big talking point in America in the year 2024 is, thanks to, like, HBO and some of their spectacular programming, a lot of us are convinced that, I shouldn't say us because I'm really not, I'm just trying to speak on, like, a platform. Many people are convinced that there are secret polygamy cults within Mormonism that regular good Mormons look down on, and then other people think they don't look down on them and it's part of it and stuff. So I'm just curious, having grown up and lived in Salt Lake City, do you believe that there are people secretly supporting that polygamy, or do you think it really is a thick black line between, like, my word, Orthodox Mormon who practices that versus a regular Mormon?
There's a pretty thick line.
Okay.
But there are like a bunch of offshoots. So yeah, there's a bunch of offshoots of the Mormon, main vein that may call themselves Mormon or something, or they have the same. They worship Joseph Smith, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And they might still practice. Like, I think the Sister Wives show
Mm-hmm.
was one of those groups, right?
That was definitely, yeah.
So, but yeah, as far as the main vein that has this prophet and these 12 apostles, and they kind of give the word every 6 months or whatever. No, I think it's pretty much gone.
Yeah, your own bio says, having left the religion. That's not a scathing commentary on it, nor is it something like praising it. It's actually just pretty absent of emotion, which I am impressed by. So I'm curious, are you very distanced now from Mormonism, or are you still in contact with many family members and people who worship it? Like, what is your relationship to it?
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
I'm totally still in contact with everybody.
Cool.
Don't go to church. All my neighbors are Mormon, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And we just, we're friends and whatever. But yeah, I don't participate at all. Yeah.
And what was the incident or incidents that led to that?
It was realizing, I was taking a hard look at my life at about 22 and 3, and realizing that I didn't have anything that I wanted. I wasn't happy. This wasn't where I wanted to be, and I didn't know why.
Mm.
And so it was that experience of being like, what is it about the way I'm living my life that is not giving me what I need? And one of the main tenets of my identity was Mormonism. And it really wasn't on the table right away to question. I started questioning other things because I realized there's something I don't know, something I'm not doing right, a misconception. I don't know what it is. And just starting that questioning process eventually led me to realize that I think the heart of the matter is this religion, or that I've kind of dedicated my life to, or it's, whatever in me made me dedicate my life to any religion, right?
Wow.
And so that's when I was like, oh, we gotta let this one go. This is not me anymore.
Were your parents or siblings, if you have any, upset? Was it like hard, or were you allowed to just very peacefully do this?
Well, I was basically allowed to very peacefully do it, but they were really shocked and surprised because I was more of a fanatic about it than any of them.
Ah, that's
And
so
so,
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
so for me to like shut it away, they were like, "What the hell is going on?" So,
Minus the word hell, probably. What is
oh yeah.
no, I'm just kidding. What's the what would you say now that you've like been separated from the church officially for approximately 13, 15 years? What would you say is the chief difference between the normal version of Mormonism as practiced by the majority of Americans, especially in Utah, versus the normal version of Protestantism, Christianity in America?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I thought you were going to go down like versus all the different sects of Mormonism or whatever,
No,
which I
I'm
don't
just
know very much about. Okay,
Yeah.
but let me get my mind right on that. So Mormonism versus the rest of the Protestants, and then even maybe the Catholic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just don't know
Good
anything about
question.
Catholicism, so that's why I didn't ask it. But yeah, please include whatever you want.
Really good question. So the thing that I liked most about the Mormon religion was the theology. You know, the actual like, okay, what's the base metaphysical structure of this belief system and all that. And it is quite different from the Catholics. In fact, I would say it's almost as different as you can get from classical theology that you get from the Catholics, and that a lot of the Protestants kind of adopted as still their base layer. So that base layer, I would say, is the main difference in a theological standpoint. So, you know, there's all this stuff on top of that, which are different beliefs that I think most people talk about, which could be like, I don't know, faith versus works, you know, if you're a Methodist or whatever. And then, you know, there's other things like original sin, and there's all these questions that seem like they flow from the base that people tend to disagree on in these different Protestant religions. But I think the base is the most radically different. So let me just tell you what it is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We'll look at the Catholic part first, or the classical theism part. They say, okay, well, we need to be able to, there's a causal reason for everything that happens. You know, so we can roll that back, and eventually we get to something that happens because nothing caused it, and that's God, right?
Yeah,
So
cool.
that's the first cause, right? That's what it is. And I think all the other religions, as far as I know, I'm not an expert, but as far as I know, they're all like okay with that, and they're like, yeah, that's, you know, obviously that's like the Western idea. That's causation. We got it. But Mormonism kind of goes against that basic premise in my mind, in my reading of their theology. And so the Mormonism says, okay, God is eternal. Yes, just like the classical theists might believe or whatever. God is eternal. It's always existed, always will. You could call him the first cause if you want, but that's not quite right, because the essence of a human being is also eternal. And that's their main premise. So in everything else, man is created, he's a creature, he's created, and that's still true in the Mormon idea of our bodies and you know, everything that makes us our individual self. But they retain this idea that the essence of the individual is also co-eternal with God.
Wow.
And so I found that to be really fascinating before and after leaving that religion. That is interesting because it changes the calculation of free will. You know, the Catholics basically say, well, you're created, God created you, and then he gave you free will. And you say, well, how is that logically possible? Because however he created me actually determines my trajectory. And they say, well, I don't know, it's magic, right? But the Mormons have an answer for that. They say, well, he went out and got your essence from some outer darkness, chaos area, and then put it in a body and let it evolve the way it's going to evolve. So being co-eternal with God, they have an excuse for saying you actually have real free will, as free as God. You're not caused to do what you do, unless you cause yourself to do it. You're a first cause. You're a first mover. And I think that's really significant, but it's not something that the church really emphasizes. It's just kind of part of the deep doctrine, part of the theology, but we just ignore that. And I think it's interesting, though.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it's I mean, it doesn't match, but it's much more aligned to quantum physics and a lot of modern and ancient metaphysical thoughts, as far as like, especially that thing about the origin and the creation. Like, the Big Bang has the same interesting dilemma as what you described in the base tenet of Catholicism and the other major Western religions. And that's an evolved take, first of all, in my opinion. And by evolved, I mean that it gives a lot more room to a larger like focus and thought pattern than the other ones. It's much less limited. So I'm really interested by that. And then I was going to say this earlier, but now is like an even better time. And this includes you because we're like 15, 16 minutes into an interview. Every Mormon I've ever met, and I went to high school with about 6 or 7 of them. And then I met a few since then. So I would just say out of like the 20 Mormons I've known, most of them are no longer religious, but all of you are some of the like nicest, most thoughtful people I've ever met. And it's like undoubtedly related to the lifestyle and family values and raising that goes on in Mormonism. And yet I will say there doesn't seem to be the guilt and other shove it under the rug issues that I find with other religious people. Is that fair? Does that match any of your feelings? Or do you think my sample size is way too small?
I think that's halfway fair. Yeah, I think the Mormons do great at community, pretty good at community and making nice people, I guess. But one thing, I don't know about the guilt, though, because there's still a lot of guilt. It's probably getting better nowadays, but back in my generation of growing up, I looked at statistics before I left the church and was kind of shocked that I don't remember these statistics. They were like 15 years ago or something. I do remember seeing that teenage bisexual or any kind of sexual difference than the norm had a higher suicide rate in Utah than a lot of other places. You know, some of these things, I think there are a lot of guilt that is swept under the rug, especially in the teenage years or young adult years. But I think it's getting better. You know, I mean, it has to get better because the community of, humans on Earth are like, hey, we're not going to be enslaved by your thought processes on this or that. So I think it's getting better, but I bet it probably has a long way to go still.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that you clarified all that. So just because, again, I was raised like maybe slightly Jewish, and I really don't know a lot about the other major Western religions, do Mormons believe in the exact same hell that the Catholics and Christians do?
No. They say, look, there's one place we could really call hell, and that's outer darkness. And so you go here, you get a body, you get resurrected because that's like a free gift or something. And then you're cast into outer darkness, which just means you're alone forever and you're just stuck out there forever.
That sounds truly awful.
You know who gets to go there?
Yeah, who?
Not murderers, not bad people. Anybody who, they came up with this concept when elite kind of leaders in the early cult church were leaving. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, we need a place for these people. So they said, those are the people that go to that hell.
Oh, wow. So you are going to the dark place.
Yeah, I guess. But they say for the average people, for 99% of all people, hell is not that. Hell is a better place than Earth. It's a lot like Earth. And it's just the idea of you go to a place where you can't progress. You can't get any better at being whatever, right? You're kind of just stuck at the progression you got, and there you go. So hell is like Earth. It's like not that bad. That's their concept of hell.
It's really interesting, and it does explain why I said the thing about guilt. It doesn't mean I was right, because I don't think I am, and I trust your opinion and judgment much more, but it does explain why I got that weird feeling, just because I'd never heard a Mormon friend say, like, I can't do that.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, I could go to
the
hell.
Hellfire is not really, that's not there. That's a good point.
Yeah, so it's just interesting because I think, to me, I have 3 children, the meanest thing in the world that I could ever do to my kids is convince them that there's an eternity that punishes them. Like, and I'm not saying this to listeners who believe in that you're wrong. I'm saying it's just mean. Even if it's true, it is a cold, cold thing to tell a child.
Exactly.
Oh, gosh, you've answered so many interesting questions I've had, and you've even answered ones that are like in my head and I can't get to. I do want to absolutely ask you right now because I think it's the best time. So now, at your current age and with your modern views and positions, what do you think is going to happen to you when you die?
So I, you know, uh, this is a really good question because when I left the church, I lost what I really, I was a fanatic, right? So I really believed I was a true believer, not one of these moderates. It's like, yeah, it's pretty good. No, I was like, this is the way it is. And so I had this really core belief that after I die, I shed the body. I am still a spirit. I'm still me. And then I continue on forever. I don't ever die for real. Like death is not ever going to happen. But then when I left the church, that was taken away. So that was a wild experience because I didn't anticipate that would be such a hard experience to have your immortality stripped away and you really are immortal, So that was wild. And at first, I kind of thought, well, then it's just atheist, material reductionist, kind of bumping particles and everything's random. And that's basically it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So but that only lasted about 6 months, because I couldn't explain how it is that I'm experiencing the world through that model. I couldn't explain it. And so I thought, well, there's got to be something else. And as I looked in, I saw metaphysics and this awareness, this, subjective conscious experience, it just seems so radically unique and different. So I started to have to try to build a model that I knew wouldn't be true, but could at least be explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
And so long story short, I have that kind of metaphysics now, but it implies that death is not exactly the end. And so I've wondered, is that just my desire expressing itself? Since I maybe want to believe this, I was comfortable with this, but I don't think so. And I think the evidence bears it out because, the books. I mean, there's all these books about afterlife experiences, people who have died, they've been dead for hours, they come back, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of these experiences that are well documented. They have information that they couldn't have got in some cases, like that there's items on the roof or, something that they saw during their travels, journeys, whatever. And also I saw a ghost one time.
Cool.
And so I have personal experiences that tell me death is not just the material reductionist end. And I'm unable to really conceptualize what that would look like, even if it was true. And that kind of tells me something.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, but I feel like it's more of the same.
This is the kind of show where we cannot let you say you saw a ghost and then just leave that alone. So I want to ask you very specifically, and I want you to tell the story to whatever level you feel comfortable and no more. But did you see a ghost or did you feel the presence of a ghost?
I saw one.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, well, this is a guy I didn't know very well. Okay, I had started working at this company, but I talked to him a few times. I didn't know him very well, and I started working at this company. I'd been there for 9 months or something. Then he committed suicide. So he's a good guy, I could tell, but I didn't, know him very well. All my coworkers were really good friends with him, though. And so I didn't really tell them the story because I thought it would disturb them or bother them. But the story goes like this. One day, I'm there early at like 6 a.m. I'm the only one there. And I can see down the hall because there's kind of a door that's open. So I look down the hall because I see some movement and I see this person walking very quickly down the hall towards his desk. He's over there a little ways from me. So he goes past the door and it's 2 seconds, 1 second that he's in my view, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can see him and I see that he's walking very briskly and he seems very concerned. Something is not right. Now, this is the guy, he would work on servers. He was in charge of keeping things up and whatever. Another thing about this experience is he was not dressed normally. He had like an undershirt on and I couldn't see below the waist. So I don't really know if he was wearing shorts or what. Anyway, I had this experience where I saw him and he didn't look at me. We didn't make eye contact. So what I assumed was that, okay, something's broken. He had to get up real fast, run into work. He's going to turn on the server, do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably going to go home and get dressed and no problem, right? That's all good. Like, I get it. And I don't see him the rest of the day, and I don't see him the next day. And then the news comes out that he had committed suicide,
Oh my
tragically.
God.
And I wanted to know, like, when did this happen? And they said, well, it happened about 2 to 4 hours or something before I saw him. So it happened at like 2 or 1 in the morning. And I was like, no, that's not right. It must have happened the next day, because I saw him. And I didn't really voice this too much. I might have mentioned it to one person, but no, they were like, no, we know exactly what happened. So I was like, okay. So that was my experience. And I assume that the idea of this person, or whatever his essence is, or whatever, was regretting the decision he had made,
Mm-hmm.
thinking maybe this was a mistake, maybe this was a dream, maybe this, I want to get back to my real life. I don't think it went well. So
Yeah.
that was the experience.
That's incredible. And that was a great way you told the story. And something else I want to compliment you on before I give you the floor for the end of the interview. I like the way you use the word essence. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I think it's a word that we as metaphysical people should talk about more, because I think sometimes we try to get too specific in a conversation that has no specifics, since we're talking about concepts that our language can't even possibly really accurately describe and stuff. So I appreciate the way you've been talking about it. I can tell that you really do spend a lot of time talking about this. And so with that in mind, you have the floor. What would you like to tell my audience? It's entirely up to you.
Well, there is one question I'd like to ask you and get your feedback on, because this is a recent idea that I've had, a recent thought process, and you, having talked about death with so many people, I'd like to get your opinion.
Sure.
So I've been thinking about death in the context of quantum physics recently, and if you look at the double slit experiment,
The double slit
you
experiment.
say, okay, if we know which slit the beam of light went through, then we get a different pattern than if we don't know which slit it went through. Are you familiar with
Yeah.
this?
No, I'm tracking. Yeah.
Okay, great. So to me, just my interpretation, I'm not a quantum physicist, but my interpretation of that says this is a general principle of the world. It's not something that's just specific to light. Okay. So I take it from that perspective and I say, if there's something that I know or could know, like the information is technically available if I could get it, then the world is very particular. I see a particular thing.
Mm.
I have the information. It's what it is. But that means everything that I'm not aware of or can't be aware of actually doesn't exist as a particular thing at all.
Wow.
Does that kind of make sense?
It
is
overwhelmingly
the
makes sense.
distribution of all the things that it could be, and they interfere with each other, and that's why you get the interference pattern of what's most likely and all that. And so I've taken this kind of assertion, I guess, interpretation, and I've applied it to death itself. And I've thought, okay, if death is the way you might define, material reductionists might define it as you're just gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, then I will never know that I have died. It's not something I can know.
Mm-hmm.
It's an unknowable thing.
Yeah.
And if it's unknowable, then it seems like what it seems like to me is that it's both true and not true at the same time. Because it's in a superposition.
Yeah.
It's not one or the other. It's not something and then we just don't know what it is. It's actually a superposition of all possible states. So when I think of that kind of concept, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's so brilliant and so accurate, and yet so unfathomable for anyone who's unwilling to admit that could be possible. And I know that's like a wordy answer, but you said with your experience of talking to people, there are not as many people like you and me as there are people who just truly don't want to even consider evidence to the contrary that what you said could be true. They're fine with evidence that says you die, and they're fine with evidence that says you don't die. I don't know a lot of people who would be fine with philosophical thought experiment evidence a la Albert Einstein, a la like a lot of very famous philosophers and scientists that would corroborate what I actually intuitively feel is true, which is like the person talking to you right now might die, but the awareness of the person talking doesn't, and that awareness doesn't actually give a shit about me.
Right.
It watches me and it loves me, like, maybe, but I don't think it, like, the me is extra lovable. Yeah, that was one of the more intelligent and thought-provoking things anyone has said on the show to me, or like just in person. I'm actually going to be thinking about that a lot. Because you asked for my opinion, I just gave it, but I would say that I think there's a lot of comfort in that, actually, if someone is able to like really grasp it. And so I would throw it back to you. Do you find comfort in that thought?
I do, comfort in, because death is scary,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes me wonder about the reality of the life that I'm living. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
Like it also has an effect on the interpretation of what I think is real. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah. And for some reason it does tie in, because you mentioned the word reality, to like this ever-growing popularity of meme culture and just culture in general, talking about how we're plugged into a matrix, and how ironic it is to me that like that's popular because of a movie, but it really is like the most ancient idea. It was like Plato's cave. It's very strange to me. And then as more and more surreal events happen, we're recording this in the middle of July 2024, and we usually release these episodes about 2 weeks later. So there's a lot of surreal things going on in the mainstream in America and the world right now, and I'm not going to mention them out of time reasons and other reasons, but my point is, the more reality becomes surreal, the more I think your superimposition theory, as I'm calling it, would make sense to me.
Yeah.
Like your timeline, Jordan, is your timeline and mine is mine, and we just happen to meet in this timeline.
Yeah. I read the book, the Baudrillard book. What is it?
Oh, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
A Simulacra and the Simulation, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of blew my mind, because it implied that reality has to be a simulation of itself. So it has to be a simulation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's wild. And so I love talking about death, thinking about it, trying to figure it out.
Likewise, and you have been an excellent guest. We're actually now starting to get people back and have them on for second episodes. So since this one could have run a lot longer, I'm going to put you on that list. So I would love to have you back on the show, Jordan. You're a very interesting and intellectual person, and I'm shocked. I would have thought you would want to plug something and denigrate the Mormon religion. Instead, you were like, let's not talk about it, and let's be respectful and talk about like the most interesting thing in the world, which is what is going to happen when we die. So thank you, Jordan. You're an excellent guest and a great human. And to everyone listening at home, as always, you've been listening to Coffin Talk. My name is Mike Oppenheim, and the best way to support the show is to head over to mikeyop.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com, where I write a weekly essay that very often covers the things we talked about today. So thank you again, Jordan, and thank you again to everyone for listening, and we will see you soon.